Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we unpack lessons for the public service, starting with the Robodebt Royal Commission. I'm Alison Lloyd-Wright, Managing Director of the Good Trouble Group and a recovering public servant. And joining me today on Kaurna land is my fellow recovering public servant, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Danielle Elston, Managing Director of Good Government Advisory.
Hello, Alison.
You'll have seen in our feed the interview Danielle and Caroline recently recorded with the Honourable Amanda Vanstone. And if you haven't listened yet, we'd recommend pausing this episode, jumping back to listen to that one, because there was so much in it that we want to spend this episode unpacking some of what she raised. Whether it was compliance or Centrelink or cricket, she covered a lot of ground. But more than that, it was a real window into how power, responsibility and decision-making played out at the very top of government. So just to recap you a bit on the episode, Amanda Vanstone served more than 2 decades in federal parliament, including as a cabinet minister across portfolios like education, employment, immigration and justice. In our interview with her, she was characteristically direct, describing a very practical approach to being a minister. Ask questions until you understand, visit programs unannounced, and never forget that if your name's on the decision, you're going to wear it.
I loved that.
Oh, it was, yeah.
She has a super sharp sense of how power flows, not just formally and informally, and offered a set of values around compliance, equity and ministerial accountability that was internally consistent and deeply felt. Whether it was welfare recipients or a corporate fugitive like Christopher Skase, she believes the law should apply equally. And crucially, that ministers should be willing to say, that doesn't feel right, and go digging. She also speaks about what's missing in today's policy-making culture. The courage to stop things that aren't working, the discipline of working through decisions iteratively, and the importance of showcasing what the public service actually delivers. If we don't tell people what their tax dollars pay for, she asks, why would they support further investment? So what we're going to do today is just dive into a couple of the themes from that interview. And the first one I want to start with is sacking leaders when you change government.
I can't imagine why you've chosen that one to start with, Alison.
So Amanda was really clear. She didn't believe in sacking public servants just because they were aligned with the other side of politics.
Also, appeared to be aligned, right? Like someone had said to her, that's a Labor person, which is also the first bit. Says who?
Yeah.
And it turned out that he was one of the best people she'd ever worked with. And for her, it was a matter of principle. If we don't want incoming governments clearing out the other side, we shouldn't do it either.
Yeah.
Is that approach of give them a crack, see if they're any good, still alive in the public service?
I think it depends on where you are. I note there's a couple of articles and of someone who's been on this podcast recently, Andrew Podger had one in the Mandarin recently about the current federal election and that they should commit to ongoing secretaries. I mean, we've been here before on the podcast.
Well, we had Mike Kaiser who was turfed out at the recent Queensland election, right?
I'm not convinced that once you get to secretary level, this ongoing tenure gives you frank and fearless advice. Andrew Podger gives a very compelling argument for it. But I always go back to the labour hire part, which is like, why do they get so much tenure, but a lot of the rest of the people doing the work in government don't necessarily? I actually just think that sometimes it's just a massive misnomer that senior public servants are aligned one way or the other. Like
Agree.
I just think being seen having coffee with your minister and like smiling or laughing is not indicative of a politics of a public servant. Sometimes you might work with a minister who is just more like you, gets your jokes. You may actually secretly have very different politics to them but really like working with them. And I just think we often go, that person's really close to this government or that government in a way that just doesn't actually reflect reality.
Sometimes it's just a good working relationship, not necessarily an alignment of core political principles.
And doesn't mean that you can't, particularly secretaries, long-term public servants, you've worked for crappy ministers, good ministers, ministers whose politics you thought were really easy to implement, all of that kind of thing. Just because the last person you got along with really well doesn't mean that you wouldn't go back to working for another one that you didn't really like that much.
It's so funny. I've been re-listening to the Jeremy Hayward memoir written by his wife Suzanne Hayward.
Fantastic.
It's such a good memoir. So Jeremy Hayward ended up being cabinet secretary, all sorts of senior roles in the UK, under 3 different governments. So he was in the Prime Minister's office when it was Thatcher. Then he worked in number 10 under Blair, and then he worked in number 10 under Cameron. And he describes, or his wife describes, because he's deceased, but his wife describes this kind of the way in which, as each of the people come in, he goes through an active process of building trust and showing really performatively the way in which he's building that trust. And there's this great story where when Cameron gets in, the people in number 10, all the public servants have got swollen eyes because, they've just said goodbye to Gordon Brown and they're like, sad, but there they are welcoming. And he goes into a quiet room just to have a little moment, and he finds a Tory advisor who says, I found this on the printer for you. And it was like an all caps letter from Gordon Brown saying, you were the best advisor I've ever had. And he's like, oh, that's lovely. Also slightly inconvenient for this time.
Oh, well, I was going to tell a similar story, which is...
all caps too, just leaving
all
that.
Caps is such an old
Hashtag boomer.
Australia's first cabinet secretary, Sir Alan Brown, one of the 7 dwarves, if you're into that.
Our history.
So a sort of cabinet office was set up under Chifley, and he would sit in on the cabinet meetings. And then, of course, Chifley gets turfed. Conservative government comes in, and they've got this senior public servant sitting there, and they say to him, they're a bit suspicious. They're like, you're not
one of us.
You're not a member of the Labor Party, are you? And he said, no, I'm not. Silence. He says, but I wouldn't be caught dead with your lot either.
In the trust, that would be the most trust-winning activity ever, right?
Like, can't we just accept that there are? For some people, I think seeing how the sausage is made up close, makes them more apolitical.
Oh,
totally.
There's nothing like spending time with lots of ministers of all different colours to go, oh my God, there's not that much in it. And also,
competency is evenly distributed is a nicer way of putting that.
Thank you.
Yes.
That was much better, Caroline. Thank you.
There we go.
But just while we stick with this theme, how do we recenter merit and trust in these political and administrative relationships? Is there anything that senior public servants, as an incoming government is arriving, should be thinking about doing to establish that trust early?
Well, I thought the way that Amanda Vanstone described this particular interaction with this DepSec was it was perfect, right? Like she was given an enormous and quite challenging savings task. That particular public servant came to her and said, look, I'll come to you with a long list. We'll sit down, we'll talk them through, and then we'll refine it down. And it was through that process of seeing that he was bringing her genuine opportunities, that he had competent understanding, like his competence clearly impressed her.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. You just, what do they want? You go and deliver it competently, and you're not defensive about the things that have previously been a part of what you've done.
Yep. And he was ready.
He was ready.
She describes
so
that
true.
first meeting of he came in and he was like, so here's some things you need to know. I also think that sometimes when the government changes, there's this moment of silence for 10 days. Instead of being proactive, it's like I'll wait for an invitation and I'll wait for instructions.
Yeah, I'll wait for them to tell me what they want from me.
Yes.
They don't know what a ministerial advisory relationship looks like with the department. They
No.
don't. Well, maybe they do.
Some of
in
them
which
might,
case
but
go,
most of them don't. Yeah.
Agreed.
So let's talk about asking questions, because one of Amanda's defining habits was asking questions constantly and clearly. Who monitors that? What does it cost? How would that work? She credited her ability to cut through spin to common sense and curiosity, not genius. Her view was that a good minister isn't afraid to press a public servant for clarity, and the best ones know when they're being snowed.
Hey, can I just interrupt on this? Because I was having a chat with someone who was a junior public servant under Minister Vanstone, and I was telling them about, I was like, oh, we had this conversation, and she was talking about these questions that she asked, and like she must have been a really challenging minister to work for because she must have asked a million questions. And their response was like, oh, that's interesting. That wasn't how I experienced her. I felt like if there was something she wasn't sure of, she went down the thing, but actually she didn't ask a million questions. She asked three
good
really
questions.
good questions. And I just thought it was such a good observation. It wasn't like she was sceptical and questioning about, well, why is it blue pen, not red pen? It was she had the intuition to follow where the weaknesses were. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting.
It's so funny because, like, face value, like, that's the best ministerial behaviour in the room.
Oh, it's so annoying.
Right? I think what looks nice and what can be nice.
What feels nice.
Yeah, and what feels nice is different. Also, though, like, you're not ready. If you can't answer what it costs, if you can't answer who monitors it, the reason it feels funny is because, oh, crap, that's a very good question. Like,
yeah, this is where I was going to go. Like, I'm very open to a kind of robust curiosity of ideas and being able to because the question should help you understand where the minister's coming from and what their thinking on it is. So, like, every question is giving you information as well as requesting information. But it only feels like an interrogation if
you can't clearly answer.
You can't answer it, right? And if you assume that the questions are coming from a place of curiosity, not from a place of
gotcha.
Yeah, gotcha. Then I think it's a very different dynamic.
I think, though, a trick I often use when people in power ask me questions I don't know the answer to, which is remarkably often, is like I narrativise out loud. I'm like, it has never occurred to me to ask why we fund A and B differently. Now that you've pointed that out, that is such an interesting dynamic. I really want to go and understand the history of that because it may be there's no good history or not, right?
Yeah.
But it gives you exactly that prompt to show your minister that you understand, to Alison's point, what are they interested in? Like, why are they asking? Probably because they're trying to work out, is a stakeholder going to be annoyed if blah or blah? Why are they asking? But also that you have the confidence to say out loud, I'm good at this not just because I know everything, but because I know what to go and ask for as well, maybe?
Yeah. It's always been my advice to own up to not knowing the answer to a question.
Totally.
100%. The number of times you've sat there and you've listened to someone give an answer and you're like,
you
sorry?
didn't know that.
Like, excuse me? I am very confident you made that up.
But it goes to that earlier thing about establishing a relationship of trust.
Yeah.
Right? You can only have a relationship of trust if I say, actually, I'm really not sure why that is funded differently, but give me a day or two. I'll go away and I'll do some investigating. I'll come back to you and we can have a discussion about it.
But also, it's so interesting you were talking about that gotcha part because some of it's about confidence, some of it's about experience. Because I think if I had been, 20 years, 15 years ago, if Amanda Vanstone had asked me a question like that I should have known, I would have potentially had a gut reaction that it was a gotcha question.
Yeah.
Or I suppose it's the benefit of the doubt thing in building their relationship. I had a minister that I loved working for, but who asked a million questions and liked to do it in the room. So would read everything, but would be like, how does that interact with Section 27 and what does another department think of that and whatever else? Definitely wasn't gotcha. Great minister to work for. But my God, did you have to spend the prep time going, have I missed an angle here?
Yeah.
Because they will find it, but not in a gotcha way, just because
No,
they were a big brain.
That's
they
what
were
they
a really
want to
big
do.
brain and they wanted to know.
And that's part of how you build that trust, right? So the first few times they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, that's fine. But if they keep asking you that sort of question and you
continue
to show up not knowing or not bringing the person who knows, then you're not responding to what they need from you.
Yeah. How do people get better at asking the right questions? How do ministers and public servants get better at asking the right questions early? I mean, it's something we've kind of covered in thinking about robo-debt, but how do you not ask a million questions but ask 3 really incisive ones?
I saw a good post on LinkedIn, which we'll link to. Someone's done Anzog, maybe. Maybe it was the bridge, Maria had done a thing about what are 5 different kinds of questions. And I just think it's kind of useful to have a typology in your head of so the questions there were interrogative questions or anyway, whatever. I can't remember. Clearly it didn't
But
stick.
also, I think it's a back to basics questions, right? So when Amanda was going through examples, those questions weren't what's the fiscal wadi-wah of the da. It was how do I find it?
Yeah.
What does it look like?
I used to tell junior people that the more senior my roles got, the more I went
Stupid
back to
your questions
kindy.
are.
Yeah. Insofar as my questions ended up being variations of who, what,
100%.
where, how.
It's so true though, right? Because people working on the detail don't do the zoom out and see.
Yeah, so the thing in front of, that's what I was getting at with Amanda, thing in front might be a complex thing. And she was so who monitors it? And everyone's we were worried about how it intersected with the section of the Act combined with where the Treasury would fund it.
Good question.
Good question.
Good
So
question,
I actually think good questions are usually very back to basics.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a bit about knowing your history. Amanda quoted Thatcher, Keating and Kennedy, not as punchlines, but as thinkers. And for her, understanding government means reading widely, across the ideological spectrum, and valuing leadership that can shift public sentiment. She was just as happy invoking a Kennedy speech as she was invoking Costello or Howard, because the ideas mattered more than the tribalism. Do we think that kind of cross-aisle respect and curiosity is still valued in public life?
I think history is devalued, firstly, so no one's that interested in the big ideas that shaped how we do the work now.
I have such a feeling that we think that's what it is, but that it's not actually true, because I've been doing, in my day job, I do work on early childhood education and care. And so we talk a lot to MPs about kind of where things come from. Speaking of 2 funding systems, let's talk about 7, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we prepared a 1-page little slide that was just this is what we did in the 70s, this is what we did in the 80s, this is what we did in the 90s, this is what we did in 2000s. And I can't tell you how often MPs, ministerial advisors refer back to it when they talk to us. They're
Interesting.
This was when we made that choice to make it a market and not just fund all the... So I think it's not that people aren't interested in history. I think it's that we don't present our history in ways that make it feel relevant and immediately contextual to now. Whereas, Michel Foucault would say history is only of interest to understand the now. There we go. There's my posh PhD reference for today. But I do think, thank you, right. But I do think it's almost part of our job, right, is to kind of say, well, why?
Yeah, here's the context of how we got here.
That's right. That's why the Abel Rizvi interview on the Joe Walker podcast about immigration blew my mind. I had no idea how we ended up with a skilled migration system that was so tightly linked to our universities, blah, blah, blah. And I'm this all makes sense to me now, why it's quite hard to change it, right?
100%. And you can go, just because yours is much more relevant, but mine is more out there in the sense that I am currently on a Churchill bender.
Oh, love it.
In relation to the fact that the geopolitics we're watching at the moment is the breakdown of geopolitics that was set up in the last 18 months of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And that shift from Britain being unable to defend itself and what they gave away to the US to survive and how that built the geopolitics we operate under now in relation to right to defence spending, economic stuff, everything. And it has, like you're saying, made me go, oh, okay, so I understand how we ended up with Europe not having a defence manufacturing industry, because it was a part of the setup. It was on purpose. It wasn't an accident. And when things get really far away, we think, oh, it just happened by accident.
Or happened by accident. It's either there's a really good reason for it that continues and that's how it has to be, or it's just kind of where we are and there wasn't any logic at all.
Yeah.
And it makes it all feel hard to change. That's why I love history, because it shows you that there's agency. You can make different choices. Policymakers and politicians can make different choices now, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because you look at that period of history around kind of more military success and plans and D-Day and whatever else. What I've been really is there were choices, and they were big choices.
Gambles.
That we have built a kind of Western idea of around. So yes, I'm on a Churchill bender. You wouldn't believe it or not, I have not ever really been a Churchill, despite my whatever. And so I am now like knee deep into the oratory, knee deep into the words, and how much they were the words and the oratory, how much that enabled him to make those decisions. We have lost a lot of oratory with the way media operates. And
can I put a gender lens on this just as a shout out to people? Sorry, Alison's like, God damn it, people, move on from this. But
no.
Just to put the gender lens on it, part of how Danielle ended up down the Churchill rabbit hole, I suspect, was because we were both reading the brilliant book called Kingmaker, which was about Churchill's. That
was a while ago. That's how I ended up down this rabbit hole.
That's exactly right. Which is about Churchill's daughter-in-law, who essentially became kind of almost a concubine to various American defence attaches.
But in so doing, almost like a default foreign minister.
Exactly. Cemented.
Highly recommend, by the way.
Such a good book. We'll put the link into it. But I think, just to say, I think an over-reliance on oratory ignores all of the hidden women's work that sits under things. So I just wanted to flag that. But B, just the best book ever. People should go read it.
Well, where I was going to go with this wasn't so much the loss of oratory, although I kind of both agree and disagree, because we just have made more and varied ways to communicate.
Yeah.
And oratory was important when all you had was public speaking and radio.
Yeah. I'm being enough fuddy-duddy, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You are.
No, I am. Yeah. Like a TikTok video is a way of communicating and it's valid, and I completely agree with that.
What I was going to go with, the cross-aisle respect and curiosity, is I think anyone who's spent any time working actually in a parliament or very closely with a lot of MPs knows that actually it still exists quite strongly. There is a genuine respect, not everyone.
Yeah.
But across the aisle of certain people, we're recording this in the lead up to the election, to the federal election. I've really enjoyed Chris Pine and Bill Shorten on 7:30 Report once a week, because they're both, they're having a good time.
Yeah.
They're listening to each other.
Yeah.
There's clearly some respect there.
Agreed.
Let us move on, though, to showcasing the value of government. Amanda said it plainly. If voters don't know what you're doing, why would they support giving you more money to do it? She pushed agencies to tell stories, brief media and show their impact, not for politics, but to build legitimacy.
Can I just pause here? Because on re-listening to the episode, she talks about it in terms of building legitimacy. It was also politics. Like, I do just want to say
politics.
It's policy and politics and. Anyway, keep going, Alison. Sorry.
But in her view, the reluctance to talk about achievements is part of why the public service can lose public trust. And my own take on this is that whenever we put public servants in public, specifically usually at estimates hearings, it's the whole aim to look as vanilla, as beige as possible.
Wallpaper.
Because you don't actually want any media, you don't want any controversy, and we're doing ourselves a massive disservice.
So much so.
By making the work that we do sound very...
could not agree more. It drives me bonkers.
So is this a communications gap or a stewardship failure?
I really fall on stewardship failure, and I know that is controversial. Like I have, and especially actually I'll say this is maybe different state by state and Commonwealth to state. So any of my Victorian public service colleagues would really, I think, find life very uncomfortable if you said, I actually think part of your job is to have a public profile. And I think that's a different culture over there. Maybe it has something to do with, I don't know, the Andrews government, or maybe not, I don't know. But there's definitely flavours of it. I think if you can't, as a senior leader or as technical experts who are making big decisions like, I don't know, managing algal blooms on the South Australian coast, if you can't go out and talk to people about things that matter to them, then you are abrogating responsibility and giving the space up to the idiots on Facebook.
Yeah.
That's such a good example, though.
Yep.
That's on the basis that it's a bit easier when the information is technical. Do you know who public servants...
we're really good at putting scientists up.
We love sticking scientists on radio and saying, in that example, and I do not at me in the sense of the detail, but it's like, we need rain and this is what's going to happen and this is what it means for your health and this is what it means for the beach, and because it's factual. I think where you're getting at is social policy is much trickier to be in public about, because it's not if it rains the bloom will move on. It's it's trickier to talk about in a apolitical way. But we think apolitical is silent, and that's just absent, and I find it amazing.
Big difference between not saying anything and letting other people own the space.
That said, I still find it absolutely hilarious, the junior person who went to Amanda Vanstone and suggested Border Force as a TV show or whatever the heck it's called. I just can't imagine being in that room 20 plus years ago and going, why don't we partner with a commercial TV station, stick a camera in an airport, and also just, like, that was early reality TV, I think.
Yeah.
Just the room going, fucking what? Like, so I have grappled with what that meeting would have looked like a few times and thought, how hilarious. But also she was like, hang on.
I love it.
People
Think
want to
about
see
it
their
from all
tax dollars
sides.
at work.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
People love watching people who are naughty get caught.
Oh, totally. Lights and sirens, is that what we're talking? Like it's squarely in the bailiwick.
I mean,
right?
it's mostly mushrooms, but yeah.
There might
Marinated
be
meat.
poison
I've never
mushrooms
watched it.
that like kill people.
Mostly
so that would be
security threats. There are some drugs as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. So whatever.
And she
Compliance.
loved compliance.
Oh, she did.
Can I say I left this interview with the overwhelming sense that had she not gone into politics, Amanda Vanstone would have been
A cop.
a cop, a commissioner for something. Like, she had the clearest set of, like, conviction around and a model in her head that, like, any corporate ANSOG would love to be able to kind of, I think, write down. Because we get very muddy on all sorts of compliance. And I just left with this, like, she could have kept talking about compliance for a day.
Yep.
Yep.
Agreed.
It just had, like a really consistent view. Everyone.
It's a rule. You stick to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fairness
where I
means
didn't-
rules are applied equally, essentially.
Which is like, I mean, it's a political choice. And so it was so interesting the way in which some of that content rubbed up against my values. Like, she talks a little bit about immigration, and she talked a little bit about refugees and asylum seekers and da-da-da-da-da. And, like, it was so interesting watching what had felt at the time as a junior person who was, volunteering on refugee cases in the RRT, as it then was, and, like, protesting at uni about our treatment of asylum seekers. What had felt at the time like it was driven from her, and quite personally from her, by hatred, was driven by this other very distinct thing that, like, when you put her whole worldview together, kind of made sense for her. And that's what I think what I liked about it is that she felt she had this principled approach to things. Like, it's like it was politics, but it wasn't just politics. It was,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Don't you
The
think?
consistency
Yeah,
of it
there
got
was
me.
something. Yeah.
Like, was trying to think of other ministers who I could put a thread over 10 portfolios of consistency, and with Amanda Vanstone, the consistency was compliance and her approach to it. Whether I agree with it or not, man, it's easier to work for a government a minister who is consistent.
Yes.
Like, by the time you got her fourth portfolio, if you weren't walking in on day one with your compliance strategy, you weren't reading the room.
Yeah.
That's so true.
One of her more delightful qualities, although there were many, was how seriously she took the everyday mechanics of government.
So cute.
She talked about reading the actual form, the GST form, and what she'd learnt from her retail trading at Myer, and, that the finance language didn't make sense to normal people. And just as telling, and I have a hilarious story about this, she rang the person who actually prepared the brief. Not the exec who signed it, which was often a junior public servant who prepared it. And I loved her story of it sending the department into a panic and the rogue appearance of a DepSec.
Just checking.
Is everything okay? But her point was, you've got to kind of actually engage directly
DepSec didn't write the form.
with the people who are preparing the work. My hilarious story on this is as a medium junior person, I wrote a minister a briefing, as you do. It went through maybe 5 other people before it got to the minister, maybe 6.
I was going to say at least, surely.
And the minister rang me, and this was back when we had desk phones.
Oh,
I picked up
God.
the phone and they said, blah, 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 and had a crack at me about some of the contents of the minute. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to need you to stop there
where
so
this is
that I can pull up the electronic document management system and see all the versions, because what you're talking about wasn't in the version that I prepared you. So I'm happy to talk to you about it, but
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I love this so much. And it's,
So, like, again, it's a bit like the other one of questions. Love it from the outside. Do you love it on the inside? And one of it's about whether you not trust your staff, but like I've been in situations where I would have let anyone in my team like directly respond to anything. I have been in others where I would not have had that confidence.
Yeah.
And because they don't always have the picture in their heads, right? Like I've worked in a portfolio where a minister was very keen to get some compliance action up about a particular thing, and the team involved in doing that kept saying, sure, we can get some prosecutions up on this. And I kept being like, well, we haven't done it for 10 years. Why do we think we can do it now? And, if the minister was speaking directly to those people, would have got the wrong and false impression that a thing could happen. But actually, it turns out a thing couldn't happen because various other reasons. So I could just think it's there is context around this.
I do think that ministers, this is that thing about public servants staying close to community. Like, she read the form because she knew she was going to have to stand behind people throwing eggs when they rolled out the GST. And she wanted to be able to say, no, it's not hard. Like, doing your best is easy. And so she, like, I think we can sometimes, the public servants can sometimes be a bit dismissive of, oh, they heard at a barbecue X or whatever else. But the thing is, that is how government lands in the real world, everybody. Yeah. And so when the minister says, what the heck's that? I can't remember what she said, but she was like, well, if you know how to do stock in a shop, that's not what it's called. Yeah. And so they're going to get the form and, like, they bring a lot of value from those barbecues and those street corners that we can be that people can be a bit dismissive of.
I was just impressed that she sat down with the form and tried to fill it out, like there's a bit of an absence.
I was working with someone recently and they thought before we went to a particular workshop they should probably like do the old person facing, like, is this thing easy? And like, so it was an online thing. Yeah. And immediately discovered, and we had to move the workshop date out because they were like, oh my God, this is as bad as we thought it was.
That's so
as we didn't think it was.
Yeah.
And they're like, because they'd had all this advice that it was fine and it worked well, and they were like, I'm the boss and I cannot figure this out for love nor money. Yeah. So yeah, like, I think there's a lot of value in it.
Which is why I think comms teams should be also thought about as user-centered, like user design teams, because like they are usually the ones who discover this stuff before it goes out, if it gets discovered.
And they're usually the ones saying, a number of good friends in comms departments who are on like a plain English
fatwa ban. Oh no, the other thing, like
campaign.
Campaign.
Who end up in arguments with various technical experts about, well, you can't just say,
don't do X.
Pursue intersection, blah blah blah.
Med fly, not Q fly.
That's
true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that was interesting about Amanda's time as minister was the savings that she had to make. And she talked us through how you can design savings, not just cuts, right? Starting with the long list, workshopping it down, build up the detail until a decision can be made. It was very methodical, wasn't a slash and burn. And she said she was really unimpressed by lazy savings approaches like efficiency dividends, and believed more people needed the courage to stop programs, not just trim around the edges. To which I was like, preach, sister.
100%.
Most people aren't stupid, she said. They understand trade-offs if you explain them. Is there enough political or bureaucratic courage to shut down programs that aren't working?
Let's do a whole episode on it. No.
You'd have to know they aren't working, though, which I think is part of what the conversation you guys had with Amanda got to.
Yeah.
Is like, if they're, particularly when we're talking about her time on audit.
Yeah.
If they're producing their report and no one really asks, how do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think more generally, and we will talk about this in a whole other episode, I think we do find it hard as a country to say out loud some people won't get some things.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a failing of courage. Sure, but I don't think that's anyway, we can do this in our Doge episode, but I don't I don't think it's just a failure of public service courage.
Yeah.
There's something else going on. And I recommend, in fact, here's another pod recommendation, the Judith Brett, Joe Walker podcast interview, where she talks about the kind of, we've done this, haven't we, the fundamental difference between Australia's conception of democracy, like our literal conception, how we got to democracy in other places, is that we started with a giant fucking subsidy from the UK government. And so the conversation was always, what can government do for you?
Yes.
Whereas, in Britain, the conversation was keep government off my ploughshare and my...
Until the Second World War.
Until the Second World War, right?
Sorry, Churchill bender.
We're back here. So this is, I do think there is something interesting, which we will get to. So yes.
I liked that. I mean, I think there's a benefit of being in a government that's being clear. So you've got an authorising environment. So they came in with that view. So she had a mandate, which...
Yep.
Is a particular set of circumstances, but I still maintain that the way she described it probably wasn't how that entire cabinet went about making those savings.
I had a gender
It said like
thing.
she was making very deliberate decisions as opposed to, well, the mandate is cut, so yeah, just give me a list, yeah, that'll do, and cut. Like it was like, I got the sense that she was like, no, not that one. Like, hang on, I've been convinced now, but that means we're going to have to do more heavy lifting over here where I'm not that interested in spending any more money or whatever. So it was active, not just left to department secretaries.
Active and iterative.
But I felt more, she said something that made me, this is my gendered lens, I'm on gender today. She was, surprisingly, I don't think anyone's ever cast her in this, but she felt to me like the good girl that went and did the thing she was told to do. She had the largest proportion of savings and she actually delivered them.
And she delivered them. And got turfed from cabinet as a thank you. Yeah.
And she had no views on that at all.
But I did think there was, so it was like she was like, did it like a school assignment almost, like she did it properly. She didn't do it with a view to being like, well, let's see what I can hide over here or do over there. She's like, it's my job to deliver this thing.
I've got my list. I've got my job.
It was that compliance fairness thing as well.
Oh my God, yeah.
Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is why she'd be great to work for, because like she actually wants to do the things she says out loud she's doing.
One of the things Amanda floated was making a documentary about what it actually takes to design a major policy or reform. Yeah, there's a word there, Alison. One of the things Amanda talked about was making a documentary about what it actually takes to design a major policy or reform. So first up, SBS, ABC, give us a shout.
Happy to chat.
But really not a spin, just to show the public how messy and contested and thoughtful the process is. And she wanted people to see the trade-offs and the pressure and the politics and the hours that go into even a rough consensus. Would you be comfortable having your policy process filmed?
Firstly, we have resisted all efforts of Caroline's to even do visuals for this podcast, Alison, and I'm currently sitting here on a public holiday in what I would say is not our glad rags.
I am wearing pimple patches.
So as a general rule, it's the visual that I'm like, nah, leaving that department pretty quickly. I'm not going in a doco. But I think it would be really interesting. I think there is less interesting content out there. I think a really sharp comms person could also make it interesting, so it wasn't just everyone in the meeting kind of thing. And it's like her Border Force idea or whatever that show is, Border Patrol, whatever it's called.
Border Security.
Thank you, sorry.
Alison's watched every series.
I know I have. I know she has, and I don't even know what it's called. But it is the transparency lens, and in this age of kind of, I don't know, uber adversarial contested parts, to be able to show how you make those decisions would be an interesting part of, is this a part of how we have to move forward so they trust us?
So my view on this is that a well done public consultation process should do some of this.
Ooh.
So in my experience, engaging... So it really helps if your consultation process isn't here's the thing we've spent the last 18 months cooking up. Would you give us a
Welcome.
go ahead?
Yeah.
It really helps if it's a genuine conversation about choices.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Co-design.
That has its own meaning. A genuine conversation about choices and saying, here's the objective we all want to get to. Is it a shared objective? Yes. What would we have to stop doing? What would we have to trade off? Where are the compromises? What are people going to say about that? To get there, I think my experience of doing that through various public consultation processes has really helped people understand the art and challenge of policy making, because they come in with we should make all electricity free. Yeah. And you're like,
Okay. So now what are you thinking?
Let's just unpick that one for a second. Even simple things like explaining different tiers of government and, we couldn't, a universal basic income would belong to the federal government.
The other one. We're this one.
We're this one. And here's what we can do and here's what we can't do. I think because I'm obsessed, as you both know, with people understanding trade-offs. Right? That everything that you do means you're not doing a different thing. And I think it's really useful to help people think through some of those trade-offs, right?
Agreed.
So if we do this, are you saying that we're spending less on child protection? No? Then what are we spending less on?
Agreed. Maybe let's do an episode on community engagements that have gone right and wrong, because there's lots of interesting things to talk about there. What I was going to say, Danielle, is I actually think we do have, if not a documentary on policy design, we have a show about policy design, which is like Utopia. And the thing that
I thought the same thing. The only show I can think of is Utopia.
Finish.
Sorry.
Thank you, ladies.
Sorry.
But I think the problem, and everyone says this about Utopia, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of people who say, I can't watch it because it's too much like my day job. But the bit that's missing from Utopia are the bits where things go right. And so what Utopia does is it takes the worst 20% of your job and just talks about that. But they never get a thing up. They never deliver a thing. They never get the joy of actually seeing people have they never have a minister who makes a bold call. They never, it's always the worst of the world. So true. I feel like there is a platform there. Anyway, that's just...
Are you asking Working Dog to call us now?
Oh, right. Muster Dogs is like the perfect version of the thing.
Working Dog is the production company. Anyway, this is hilarious.
I love that I was on a different plane. But I think Muster Dogs, by the way, is like a brilliant policy piece of work, because it's all about country. Anyway, right. It's all about country economies. Whatever. My kids are going to... Yeah, thanks. Bye.
All right. Let's wrap this up with... So I guess by the end of the interview, one floating unspoken question: would Amanda Vanstone be the best minister you ever worked for, or the scariest?
Both.
Yeah, my answer to that was yes.
Yes. I think I would have loved it and hated it all at the same time. Can I just say that interviewing her was
such a privilege.
Was such a privilege, such a pleasure, and so much fun.
Oh my God.
And reminded me how much fun that stuff can be, when you've got ministers who have strong views and are wanting to get on with it and whatever else. It was such a privilege. Working for her as a minister, the scariest, absolutely. We were terrified to interview her. Let's not tell lies, Caroline.
God. We sat in the car. For quite some time working up the courage.
Because she did ask good questions back in return. And
totally.
It felt like you might be asked it felt like you might get asked the question.
Yeah, that exposed something, and you just... Yeah. But she was so generous. It was all the things in one.
Yeah, but you'd never be left wondering. And I do feel like there's a lot of... I think it's a bit of a problem at the moment across all jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, where it's not clear what the minister wants the department to do. The minister's kind of quietly doing something over here. The department's like, should we do it as well? And I really think...
sometimes because the minister doesn't know what they want to do, except that they want to be popular.
Exactly.
That's not a strategy in and of itself.
And that's why she'd be the best minister to work for, because she wasn't there to be popular. No. She did know how to make a decision, and she did know what she wanted to do. Yeah. So that would have been the best part, but it would have...
So one of the questions I've got for you is what makes a great minister, but I think we're on it here, right? Yeah. It's consistent, decisive, curious, committed,
able to take in information and change their mind.
Yes, and that's not inconsistent with consistent, right?
No, not at all.
It's exactly that. It's the curious and the consistent,
because they change their mind by applying those consistent ways of they do things.
Agreed.
Well, that's it for today's reflection on our conversation with Amanda Vanstone. If you haven't listened to the full interview, it's still sitting in your feed. Let us know what stood out to you and what kind of minister you would want to work for.
And just to say, the winner of our pod mug this episode was, of course, the Honourable Amanda Vanstone.
Excellent. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.